Okay, with this video I just wanted to describe my experience in seeing Jesus. This was a dream that, to be fair, I put down as not necessarily meeting Jesus for a little while, just because I thought it was kind of almost too good to be true, if that makes sense, and I didn't want to kind of claim something that I thought there was the potential of that being incorrect. Since now 2 years later, I'm very confident that it was. But how this dream all starts, or actually no, sorry, a bit of background to this. This dream was on the 9th of September 2023. It's now August 2025. The night before, actually, we organised a Bible study. So this was the first Bible study we'd ever done. And again, a little bit of background, and I've mentioned it in previous videos, is that I was saved only in March of 2023, and this is, as I said, September. So I was building up really, reading to build up to do a Bible study. And this was just between, really between family. It was my mum, her partner, and her best friend. And it was really because I was obviously learning so much in reading and starting to put together some little Bible studies, various different things, Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and all of that kind of stuff, and was starting to put together these different ones that I wanted to share. So that evening, so we started the Bible study at 7 o'clock in the evening, and didn't finish till roughly about 12:30. So it's a.m. So it was a very, very late one. And then came back, and then went straight, well, not straight into the dream, but it was that evening. Okay, so how it starts, this dream, is, if you can imagine us being in an environment of a little bit like outside of a stadium, I would say, a little bit like a stadium where you've got that big kind of open open paved area where people can congregate, and crowds can disperse after an event. So it looked like a relatively sort of high capacity sort of place, but it felt a little bit more like a conference centre, if I'm honest. And I felt like I was with some work colleagues, and we were just leaving. So it was literally me leaving the whatever event that was that I was at. I was leaving that event, and how I saw it was I was, walking out to, all I could see in front of me was kind of a road sort of curving around a little bit, a coach sitting there obviously waiting to pick us up and take us home, I guess. So in this coach, I could see from a distance of about, I would have said about 75 feet is kind of what I've gauged it as, about 75 feet away. There was this coach. There was people already there that were getting in, people putting in all their kind of like side luggage, in the bit that you have in the side of a coach quite often, putting bags and bits and pieces in there. I was away from the group, so most of them had already started to go in. I was a little bit further behind, probably, again, about, well, as I said, 75 feet, I would guess, roughly, away from them. And I was by myself. I just happened to look back behind me, I guess maybe to see if I was one of the last ones coming in and getting on the coach. I pretty much was, but I looked back and saw that there was 3 guys that were walking behind me. There was a slightly taller one who was in the centre, and then 2 slightly smaller ones either side that were walking along. And between the 2, you'd have them kind of talking across each other, friendly sort of banter sort of between the 2, discussing stuff, and the one in the middle was also sort of mentioning things to them as they were talking between them, but they were kind of concentrating on the conversation, but walking straight towards where I was, where we were getting on the coach. The impression I got from, again, they were from a distance. I would have said that they were probably about 40 feet, maybe. No, maybe a bit further away than that, actually. Maybe at a very similar distance, actually. So I was probably sort of halfway between the 2, between the coach and them. So they were lagging behind a little bit, but I got the impression of sort of stardom. So I looked at the person in the middle and I thought, that looks a lot like Jim Caviezel from Passion of the Christ. And and I was pretty convinced it was. So I was kind of a little bit sort of starstruck, a little bit, but carried on walking. Obviously, I got myself into the coach. I worked myself down to probably about 1/3 in, I would have said. And obviously the way you have coaches most of the time would be you have the central kind of, what would you call it? Like walkway bit, and then two seats, wouldn't you? A double seat and then a double seat. Well, as I said, I'd gone maybe about a third down, and then on to the left to jump into a seat. Kind of selfish, I suppose, but I sat on the outside seat, and the bag or whatever I had with me, I put onto the other seat, or I was putting it down on the floor. Or, I think that's what I did anyway. But I know there was no one sitting next to me; it was just me, and I was sort of looking around and seeing everybody putting all, some of their luggage in. It almost reminded me like getting onto a plane. You were seeing people putting stuff in the overhead bit and as well. But everyone was just kind of finding their seats, getting themselves settled. People walking to the back, just filling up the coach. And as I said, because I was one of the last in, really. And then I saw, as I said, who I thought was Jim Caviezel coming in. I've got a feeling that the two that he was with actually had already come in. I just really hadn't noticed too much about them coming in. I just sort of looked up and then saw him at the front, and I was kind of like, oh, sort of like looking down, looking up, looking down, looking up. So when I saw him come in, he kind of had to duck his head down as he came in because he was pretty tall. I would describe him as probably 6'1", 6'2", something like that. I would use my own height, which is debated. Use my own height as a means of kind of gauging it, really. But I've been told I am 5'8", 5'9". I can test it. I'm pretty sure I'm 5'10" on tiptoes. But anyway, so he came in. As I said, he ducked down, and I'll describe to you, what he looked like. So he was wearing sort of normal clothes. We're all just wearing normal clothes. We're normal people, So he was wearing kind of like a really long, almost like a robe, to be honest, but it wasn't. It was almost like a nice warm, kind of winter-like raincoat. I say raincoat because it was past his knees. It was a long coat, all kind of earthly tones. It was kind of like greys, dark brown, that kind of stuff was the kind of clothes he was wearing. Nothing that really stood out. And as I said, he was walking. As he was walking, he was kind of, head down, so his hair was kind of coming across. Somebody who's got shoulder length hair. It was pretty much bang on shoulder length, and it was kind of just coming down just past his eyes a bit, and around. It was wavy. It wasn't tight curled. It wasn't straight. It was just little waves to it. Medium brown. Picture that how you will. Medium brown. He was clearly, clearly. I say clearly Jewish. I mean, yeah, he was how you would, if you were to see a Jew now, he looked Jewish. He didn't. Yeah, I would have said that for sure. But I didn't see any of the real features. I didn't really see, I don't think, his eyes necessarily, because he was, as I said, he was kind of looking down. But yeah, anyway, coming towards me, and I was kind of, again, because I was on this sort of aisle seat, I was just very aware, as you probably would be, if you're in a bus, coach or something like that, you tend to be, if you're on the last one, especially if you've got somebody next to you, you quite often will your legs will kind of poke out and into the aisle a little bit. So mine were kind of doing that because I was just making myself comfortable, So I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to kind of manoeuvre myself here just to make sure he can get through okay. So I ended up standing up though. So I ended up standing up and kind of shuffling in, like you would do, a little bit like, if you're in a, one of those flip seats, a cinema or a stadium or something like that, and somebody wants to get past, you kind of make yourself as small as you can and turn sideways or do whatever you can to make it as easy as possible for that person to pass. It was just like that, except, as I said, in this situation, rather than just kind of trying to pull my legs in a bit, I just decided, actually, I'm just going to stand up. So I ended up standing up. And as he worked his way down the coach, again, as I said, I wasn't kind of looking directly at him, but he wasn't looking directly at me necessarily either. He was just kind of looking down the coach. And yeah. So anyway, so I stand up, and as he's going by, I'm kind of turning my body. So I'm almost, by the time he gets to me, sort of, till we're about side on, I'm pretty much sort of side on to him as he's going by. And then I'm continue to turn. Don't know why I really do that, to be honest, but continue to turn, and until I'm all pretty much facing the back of the coach now, with obviously the seat put in front of me. And as I do that, this is when he puts his arm around me, round my shoulders and neck, and then kind of draws me in. So, like you would if you had your best mate, and you're trying to tell them something, and it was like a noisy place, you'd kind of draw them in a little bit closer. You could speak into their ear, so they could hear what you're saying over the noise. It was probably a little bit rowdy, with the amount of people that were filling this coach. And he spoke into my ear, and I knew he was speaking into my ear. It was roughly about 2 to 3 seconds, I would say, roughly, of what he was saying. But as he was saying it, I knew he was speaking Aramaic. Now, obviously, it meant I couldn't understand it, but I know 100% that my spirit could, because as soon as he was saying it, I was tearing up, and as soon as he'd said what he said, I just completely collapsed. It was just whatever he said was just too much for my body to take, and I just completely crumpled on this seat, which I was now, as I said, facing towards. So I've just kind of slumped over. But I would describe it, it's just like a full body drain. It was like there was no energy whatsoever in my body. It was completely gone. It was like like a Pinocchio strings just being dropped, and it just went over the front of this seat, and I was just bawling my eyes out, crying. He then just carried on, and as he carried on, walking towards the end of the coach, sorry, I was just kind of in awe. Knowing that it wasn't Jim. And then the dream ended. And so, obviously I came out of that dream thinking, what did he say? And I still think that. But I think it was to do with the fact that I'd maybe reached a point, I'd been coached into, potentially led to share, with my family. For context as well, my mum at that point was saved. So she started reading, started believing, same sort of time as me. Jim, her partner, was interested. Her friend Sue was interested, and so it was just a good way to share. I felt like it felt like that kind of word that I was given, whatever that was, could have been, look, you've done well. You've done this bit. Maybe this is what's next. I don't know what it was. It could have been well done. It could have been any number of things. I've got no way of knowing. I don't speak Aramaic, nor did I hear the words. I didn't hear the words. As I said, I just received them. I knew he was speaking, but I don't know what he said, unfortunately. Or fortunately, it is what it is, isn't it? And so, yeah. So that was obviously my impression of what happened there. Obviously, what I think of from, and I haven't actually thought this until very recently, is what does the coach represent? Well, from a lot of hearing a lot of dreams, many people talk about the coach as a representative of our travel, and it being a symbolism of the rapture. And it makes complete sense, doesn't it? You know, we've got loads and loads of people. They're all piling onto a coach. We're all waiting for Jesus. We're all waiting for Jesus. The other thing I wanted to mention as well was when he came onto the coach, it's like he was the one that everyone was waiting for. And he was kind of like the person that you would imagine would be like the life of the party. You know, and as he was going down, you saw the guy, you know, everybody who was on the coach, you know, at the back, and they were kind of like, come here, come back, you know, come sit with us, you know, we've saved you a seat, kind of thing, to him. But he was getting the place of, I suppose, like the place of honour. I kind of think of it a little bit like the head of the table on the back seat in the centre. Everybody else can look down and see him. You know, that's kind of what it felt like. And yeah, it almost makes me think of the Last Supper, you know, him being head of the table and all the disciples kind of looking down at him and seeing what he wants to share, you know, that kind of thing. And yeah, that was the impression I got, was, you know, everyone was waiting for him. It felt, again, only really 2 years later I've really thought about it, and from these dreams of, oh, maybe this is something to do with the rapture then. I didn't really think of it like that at all. I just thought of it as just some sort of encounter. But that's the main thing I wanted to. I mean, this is for sure the main bit I wanted to obviously share was that encounter. I have had one other encounter since. It wasn't with Jesus in that was Jesus, if you see what I mean. I know obviously that was. It was because of the way I reacted. I've never reacted like that. I've never reacted since. I've had those kind of feelings of extreme joy, and how I would say it's the Holy Spirit for sure, is that deep emotional conviction that you get in songs, in scripture, where, I mean, sometimes I can be listening, I can be not even really paying attention, you know, listening to some sort of biblical content online, and I'm half paying attention, I'm working, you know, and there's something said, and then suddenly I just feel this surge of, you know, some conviction, you know, and some sort of emotional connection with what's being said. You feel it with certain people, don't you? There's certain people that you might watch, and there's something about them that every time you watch them you get super emotional. As you can tell in this, I'm pretty emotional but holding a lot of it back. I did do a previous one and I got equally emotional, and I thought, no, I want to get one where I'm not. Failed. Anyway, there was a second dream, so I just wanted to add this one on because the first time I didn't do the second dream, but because it happened in the same night, I wanted to mention it just because it might have some relevance. So this particular dream, again, this will be short, so if you want to skip this one completely, that's absolutely fine. But what happened oh, sorry, and I want to mention something else very, very quickly about Jesus. It was that he didn't have a big beard. You know, he didn't actually have a well-sculpted beard, well-groomed. He wasn't well-groomed. He was just normal. He looked like he'd been out in the wind a bit. You know, his hair wasn't perfect. His facial hair wasn't perfect. It was kind of like a long, what would I say? Like not maintained facial hair. Does that make sense? It was longer than stuff. It was like two weeks growth. You know, 1.5 weeks growth, something like that, based on my own sort of facial hair. So it's quite a beard, but it wasn't a proper beard or anything like that. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that because obviously lots of people talk about various different things. I think we all will see Jesus differently. He will show himself in very different ways. Obviously, he comes in robes with sashes. He comes with, you know, longer hair and all sorts of different things, because I imagine he probably did look differently, you know, in various different stages of his life. In this dream, he was, I would have said, late 20s, but I would actually say early 30s. I mean, I still want to say early 40s. Just about early 40s. Yeah, he was definitely younger than me, much younger than me. I would have said, yeah, early 30s. He was also, yes, I didn't mention this, he was broad-shouldered, muscular, not gym muscular, functional muscular, I would say. So the kind of guy who works manually and has built up strong, you know, sustained kind of strength from doing his job. And obviously we know him to be being a carpenter, which would make sense. I mean, that's going to be quite a physical job, isn't it, anyway? And so, yes, that's something I did really, really want to mention, was he was strong. He was a strong guy. He was a broad guy. He wasn't thin. You know, obviously we see like Jesus of Nazareth, where he's very thin. And obviously if he's fasting, you know, that would kind of make sense. He'd lose a bit of weight. And they, you know, you hear many times they just forget to eat. But he was a strong build, very strong build. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Again, someone I forgot on the last one. So this second dream, as I said, feel free to blast past this. I realise we're getting up to a sort of longer time now anyway. So the second dream, this was the same night. And this one, I was actually upstairs in my house. I heard some weird noises coming from downstairs, and I thought I was a bit concerned. I thought I'd investigate, see what's going on. But bizarrely, while upstairs was normal, downstairs was almost like an open sort of warehouse environment, almost like an open plan office. It's really, really bizarre. And there was miniature animals running around. I don't really understand what that was about. What was weird was there was a lion that was going around that was kind of small, which was kind of like the size of a smallish, like quite a small dog. So completely out of context of what the size of a lion would be. But the pig, there was a pig, so it was only a lion and a pig, which are obviously pretty symbolic in the Bible. The pig was normal size, so that was massive in comparison to the lion. And that was just kind of rolling around, like pigs do, kind of rolling around. I can't remember if it was in mud or anything like that, but it was rolling around, and this small lion was just charging around, just owning the office, just going around, despite it being quite small. So of what that represents, obviously I would imagine that the pig represents, uncleanness, being happy in sin, with mud representing the sin and getting themselves all, kind of messy and not really caring, they'll eat anything, all that kind of stuff, unclean animal. And then obviously the lion probably representing Jesus, I would imagine. But there wasn't really that much more to that, but it was just a little snippet, which was unusual. I mean, it's a bit of a strange dream, right? So and for those two animals, I mean, whether it was representative of my state, I don't know. Whether sin was bigger than the righteousness kind of bit, with the small lion but the normal size. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, the earliest stages I would have said of being saved, I felt like I just shed everything, all of the really sort of sinful bits and pieces you get up to, that we all get up to, had just been completely shed, so I felt, and I always I'd love to, get back to that kind of, that conviction level where the smallest little thing, kind of, you're super sensitive, aren't you, to sin and things like that. So, anyway, as I said, not much more to mention on that one. So apologies for the length on this one. I just wanted it to be a bit more thorough and cover off as much information as I said. I just wanted to put in that little second dream, just in case anybody has any kind of thoughts about it. It was very, very brief, very, very brief. But I thought, as I said, I would just add it on there. Okay, so hopefully this has been interesting. I hope it's just interesting. We all have different experiences, and that was mine. I do consider myself to be incredibly fortunate to have had that kind of experience. And I've had many, many other experiences, but nothing like that. As I said, I've had one with Jesus before, which was a lot more recent, and that was one where it was almost like I'll describe it very briefly. He was kind of wandering around in a garden, and he was just kind of thinking on things and talking out, almost like he was speaking words of wisdom, and he had clearly his disciples that are all walking just a few paces, behind him, and one of them was with a notebook writing things down. And I was like, wow, that's just like, you imagine, Matthew, kind of writing down all these notes, like you see in obviously programs on TV. I won't name the name, but you know what I mean. And that was just really interesting. I knew that wasn't Jesus though. That was almost like somebody else playing that part, and he was a lot like the Jesus of Nazareth. So he's much thinner, a little bit longer hair in that one, and he was just kind of wandering around. It was like you were kind of seeing it represented of that's Jesus, And I saw loads of church fathers and all sorts in that one, all in kind of like a glory setting, where it was all misty and light, and it was like a heavenly kind of thing. But again, I'll do that one in a second in a different video. But yeah, I will end that there. Okay, thanks for your time, and yeah, as I said, hopefully you found that interesting.